Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a deeper understanding and appreciation of the wonderful world of chess. I am your host, George Meridanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club, which meets every Wednesday from 7 to 11 p.m. in the McKay Campus School, room C199 at Fitchburg State College. And with me is my trusty co-host, Martin Lane, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Well, Marty, today's topic is going to be our new Massachusetts State Chess Champion. And his name is Denis Shmelov, Denis Konstantinovich Shmelov. And he is he's going to turn 22 years old in a couple of weeks, July 25th. But in the end of May, during the Memorial Day weekend, he won the Massachusetts State Championship.
Right. That's how we determine our state championship.
We run
this tournament every Memorial Day weekend.
Every day Memorial Day, we run a 3-day tournament. Friday, that is Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it's a 6-round event. And the top players, from not only Massachusetts but also from New England. Right.
It's a strong tournament. A lot of top players go there.
That's very true. But the title of a state champion is only reserved for someone who is a resident. Now, Denis Shmelov is the first chess master to win the state championship who does not have an international title. In fact, he's the first player since 1999 who won that title. And what I mean by not having a title, the World Chess Federation awards titles: International Grandmaster, International Master.
And that's based on performance.
That's based on performance.
Right.
So he has no title. Even though he has an international chess rating, he actually has no title. But one would have to presume that he will soon acquire an international title with the World Chess Federation.
Right. Now, I understand he recently immigrated to Massachusetts.
Yes, actually, he's been here only about 2 years.
Right.
He lives in Pepperell, which is a very short distance from us, and he came here in 2006. He played in his very first U.S. Chess Federation tournament in April 2006 at the Neshoba Chess Club in Westford. That club unfortunately no longer exists. It was a very active club, for many, many years. But he played there first, and he's played all over. He's played actually at Foxwoods Casino. He's played, actually he's the champion of the largest chess club, certainly in New England, possibly in the country, is the Metro West Chess Club in Natick, which meets at the Senior Center. So he just won their club championship just several months ago. So he is proving that he is quite an accomplished chess master. And 2 years ago, when he started playing in this country for the first time, his rating was down it was 2250 in the mid 2200s. Since then he has gained more than 200 rating points in the last 2 years.
Maybe for our viewers, you could explain a little bit about some of the levels of what these points are. For instance, Garry Kasparov, we did a program on him. What was the rating? His rating?
Well, he actually went over 2,800.
2,800.
That is actually become a chess master.
Right.
Both at the World Chess Federation level and also the U.S. Chess Federation level. If you attain a rating of 2,200 points, you become a chess master.
Okay,
right.
So that's the master level, and then 2,000 points would be
expert.
Okay,
and then 1,800.
Then it goes to A and B.
Every
and so
200 points is a class, a different class.
And his rating now is
2440. His current rating, Shmelov's current rating is 2446, which puts him currently ranked 7th in the state.
And at that level, that's a fairly quick rise. That's a rapid increase.
That is actually, there's a graph. Actually, if one were to actually go on Google and just type in his name, you would actually find a graph of his performance, and you'll see a sharp rise, especially since last year. He was in the mid 2250s, and then suddenly last year he just zoomed up well over 2,400. So he's a very promising player from the Ukraine, and he was from Kharkov, which is the second largest city in Ukraine, and so he moved here 2 years ago. I think he lives with his father in Pepperell. So we're going to hear more about him because he's one of the up-and-coming players, and he's only turned 22 in a couple of weeks.
Right.
Well, the game we're going to present is actually a game that Denis Shmelov played last year at the World Open It was usually held in Philadelphia. Last year they held it in the King of Prussia,
Right,
Pennsylvania.
near Valley Forge, yeah.
Yes, right in the Valley Forge. So this is a game that he played as white against a very talented young woman, a women's international master.
Okay. Now she has a title.
She has a title,
Right.
yes. And she was a prodigy. She actually was born in Yerevan, Armenia, came to this country in her early teens. Right now she's around 20, she's 20 years old now, but she came here in early teens. Her family settled in Glendale, California. And in fact, 3 years ago, she tied for first in the U.S. Women's Championship, but there was a playoff, and she lost the playoff. They played fast games.
And what was her name?
Her name is Tatef Abrahamian, and she's a very up-and-coming player who lives on the West Coast.
All right, so we have two up-and-coming players.
Young, very young,
Okay.
you know. So, and there's a 2-year difference in their ages. But this game was played last year at the the World Open in Pennsylvania. And Shmelov opened the game with D4.
Okay. The pawn on D2 goes to D4.
Right.
We've seen that before. It occupies the center. It controls two important squares, the E5 and the C5. It opens diagonal for the black squared bishop, and it opens some space for the queen to develop if that's what he wants.
Okay. So it's black's turn, and black actually has choices here, naturally. A possibility is to play D5. For the same reason, opening up the diagonal for the white squared bishop, in black's case. And of course, the queen is just limited to 2 squares, but the idea is it actually blocks the forward movement of this white pawn. So that's a good move, but what Abrahamian chose was an equally logical move is knight f6. Knight on g8 moves to f6.
Okay.
A good move. Why? Because it actually controls this e4 square, prevents white from putting another pawn in the center with e2 to e4. All right, so it's Shmelov's second move coming up.
Okay, well, as you just said, the move to e4 is blocked off now because that space is controlled by the black knight. So Shmelov chooses to continue to try to contest the center, and he uses it by advancing his c pawn, the pawn on c2 to c4. And so now his pawns are attacking 4 of the center squares on the opponent's side, and it opens up more space for other pieces, the knight, the bishop, the queen, diagonal, and so on.
Okay. All right, so it's black's turn, second move coming up. Black has some choices here. A very common move here for black is to play the pawn on e7 to e6, which opens up actually for the dark squared bishop to come out, possibly with a check, but also to prepare the advance of the d pawn to d5. But what the black plays here is c5. The pawn on c7 moves to c5. Right. Okay, now, isn't this offering a pawn here?
Right.
This looks like this pawn is undefended.
And this is quite different from a lot of the openings that we've looked at, where it immediately makes things a little bit unbalanced, very complicated, things are coming at it in a different direction. White could take the pawn.
Yes, that could be captured.
That could be captured, but black could immediately recapture with check.
The queen could come out to a5 check, and then in the next move, recapture this pawn on c5.
Right.
Okay.
So it doesn't really accomplish anything.
Yeah. And also after the capture here, besides the immediate queen a5 check, followed by the queen taking here, but e6 is also a possibility with the threat of taking here. And if there's an attempt to defend here, it's going to fail because the pawn structure will be undermined. All right, so here's the position with Shmelov to move, third move. What does he do? Does he take the pawn?
No, but he chooses to take this pawn, take the d4 pawn and move it to d5, one more space forward, sort of going right by it, starting to create what might be a pawn chain in the future and so on, and moving into his opponent's territory, controlling 2 important squares.
Right.
At least contesting them.
Okay, so black's turn, black's third move. Well, black actually now comes with a interesting move. b5. The pawn on b7 moves to b5, offering this pawn.
Right.
Offering the b pawn. Now, does this have a name? You know, in chess, everything has a name.
I believe it's called a Benko Gambit.
Okay, now why is it called the Benko?
It's named after a prominent player, Paul Benko, originally from Hungary, now lives in the United States.
Okay, and by the way, he's actually moved back to Hungary.
Back to Hungary.
He grew up in Hungary. Actually, he was born in France, but all his formative years were in Hungary. He's of Hungarian descent, And he's going to turn 80 years old, actually, in a week or two. And he was the one that popularized this back in the early 70s. In fact, he wrote a book on this called The Benko Gambit in 1974. Now, in Russia, this is not known as the Benko Gambit. This is known as the Volga Gambit. Because actually in February 1946, there was an article, an analysis of this gambit that was published in the Russian language chess magazine, Shakhmaty v SSSR. It was written by a player by the name of Gunov. I don't know his first name, but he actually came up with this, and he said, you know, why not offer this pawn? But what is the purpose of this gambit, offering this pawn?
Well, first of all, it's going to lead to a lot of complications. As with any gambit, white is going to give up the pawn for a lot of accelerated development.
Okay,
and it's going to break up white's pawn position. White's actually looking kind of vulnerable all of a sudden if he goes on. And what we've mentioned before about gambits is if your opponent plays a gambit, if he's offering a gambit, then he knows that gambit cold. He or she knows that gambit cold. And you have to think about, you're not going to plunge into a position like this without being really certain about what you're going to do. That would be the gambit accepted.
Right.
It also leads to a wide open, very complicated game. By playing the Benko Gambit, Shmelov's opponent is telling him essentially she wants to play for an open and complicated game. He opts to play for something, he's going to play something a little bit safer, a little bit more sedate. He's going to play the knight on G1 to F3, which develops a piece. He wants to wait and see what she does with this.
Okay, so he declines the gambit, and probably a very wise choice, because if you're playing against somebody who plays a gambit against you, you have to assume that that player knows this gambit much better than you do. So this would be a very prudent choice to decline the gambit. All right, so now it's actually black's turn. So what is she going to do? Now she could take this. She actually now has a chance of taking this pawn, but instead she says, okay, I'm going to leave this pawn still for you to take. I'm leaving for you to take, and she just develops another piece. Bishop on C8 moves to B7. So bishop B7 is black's fourth move.
Right. Now he does a fairly surprising move. He takes the pawn on A2, and he offers her a choice. He moves it to A4, forcing her to decide what is she going to do with that B5 pawn. She can't just leave it there and allow him to take it.
No, because actually now white is threatening to win the pawn outright.
Right.
All right, so she has to make a decision. She can either take this pawn, that is B takes C4, or she could advance the pawn to B4. So what does she do? She has to make a very crucial decision here. What she does is she plays B. B captures on C4.
Right.
So she chose to capture.
And what that does is that now puts the D5 pawn in jeopardy. It's attacked twice, but only defended once.
Okay.
And so he has to think of a way to defend it, and the best way, probably the only way, is to play the knight on B1 to C3.
In fact, that is the only move. That's the only move to defend this pawn for the second time.
Right.
Okay, so now it's black's turn here coming up. And what black does is says, you know, I'm going to have to put more pressure on this pawn on D5. She plays E6.
Right.
So now we have a triple attack on this pawn on D5.
Right. And he needs to find another way to defend it, which he can now do. He can take the pawn on E2 and play it to E4, defending the pawn. He couldn't do it until he had played knight to C3, because now the knight on C3 defends it against the attack from the black knight.
All right. So it's her move coming up. So what she plays here, what she could have done was leave everything where it is and just, well, this is hard for her. She could actually have done a little capture here, E takes D5, but she chooses to play queen on D8 to A5. Queen A5 is black's move, seventh move for black.
Okay, and this gets to be
Is there a threat? There must be a threat here.
Well, not directly. There is knight take pawn because this knight is pinned.
Okay.
But it's a little startling because the solution to that is fairly simple. And it's not a common move. When we were talking about this before, this game earlier, we found it hasn't been played very often. And so it's something that a player always has to wonder, is why does your opponent play an unusual move? What do they have in mind?
Right.
And so Shmelov decides he's going to he needs to protect that pawn. So the answer is fairly obvious. He's going to unpin the knight by putting the bishop onto d2.
Okay, this was very so it looks very dangerous for this queen to be here along this diagonal, especially if this knight were to suddenly to move.
Well, the knight would really be free to move anywhere.
Right, exactly, because it would force the queen now to retreat or move.
Right.
So what she does here on her move after bishop d2 by him, she plays queen b6. So she moves the queen immediately. And of course, she's attacking this pawn, but this actually is a poisoned pawn. You know, that is, it's white's move now coming up. What does he do? Does he defend that pawn, or he just totally ignores that?
No, he, because if she tries to capture this pawn, she's running the risk of being trapped with rook to bishop 1 and followed by bishop to c1.
And actually, with if this pawn were taken with the rook over here, that rook would actually win this bishop down here. All right, so this is dangerous.
All kinds of risks.
This is very dangerous, but it's but what does Shmelov play here now?
And this is why Black's moves is puzzling, because he simply pushes his pawn to threaten the queen.
Well, I think actually what he did do that first. He attacks the queen first. Okay, very good move. All right, so this shows that the queen cannot take here, because yes, it would lead to the loss of the queen. So now she has a choice. She can actually retreat either here or back to d8, or even down to here.
Right.
Queen b3 is a possibility, offering the exchange of queens. But what she did is retreat. She played queen d8. All right,
so the queen is back where it started, and white has now advanced his a pawn and developed his bishop to d2. So he's in pretty good shape at this point.
All right, so now
he opts to take the pawn on d4.
All right,
take d4.
Okay, and she responds on her move, 10th move, with e takes d5. E takes d5, attacks the bishop, as well as the pawn on e4.
Right. Now he could recapture with the knight, he could recapture with the bishop, he could recapture with the pawn. But what he does, and it would look like it might be just a simple swap.
Right.
But he's got other moves that he wants to do. He's going to threaten this bishop down here he's going to push this pawn one more space to a6, threatening the bishop.
So this is what is known in German as a Zwischenzug.
Right.
It's an in-between move. So this actually, with this attack on the bishop, she cannot take this bishop, because if she takes this bishop, he would actually win this bishop on b7, but also win the rook.
Right.
So this would win a piece for white. So this would be a bad decision to take this bishop.
Right.
So she just actually retreats. Bishop c8, her only move. Or actually, she could have gone actually to c6, but this is probably just as good.
So then now to regain this pawn, Shmelov, again, he's still got choices of how he can capture. Right. And he chooses to capture knight take pawn on d5, centralizing his knight, putting his knight in a very strong space, threatening a couple of different things. And that's how he recaptures the pawn.
And look at the development, the lead in development that white has here. 4 minor pieces developed.
Right, and only one knight.
Only one knight out. So she has to catch up in development.
Right.
So she plays knight c6, plays a knight on b8 to c6,
right,
to try to catch up in piece development.
Right. And now Shmelov creates, using his advantage in development, he continues to create new threats. He plays bishop to f4.
And what's the threat here?
The threat is to win the queen by bringing it down to
if this
c7.
bishop ever came here, this queen has no place to go. Can't go here because the knight controls that e7 square. So the threat is to win that queen. All right, so how is black going to stop that threat? Well, the way to do it is just advance the pawn, d7 to d6.
Right.
Now this pawn is defended twice. The bishop on f8 and the queen on d8 protect that pawn. All right, so now it's Shmelov's turn.
He's going to continue his development. This time he chooses to castle, which gets his king into a safe spot and brings his rook into play, closer to the center of the board.
Okay, so again, she has to continue with her development. With this bishop on c8, she could have actually brought the bishop to g4, pinning that knight. That was an option. But she chose to play bishop to e6. Bishop e6 is her 14th move. All right?
Now he's going to continue building up pressure. He's going to take his rook on f1 and move it to e1, lining up right towards the black king.
All right. So now she'd like to actually release some of this tension here. I mean, look at the control that white has actually in the center. So what she plays here, she could have actually played, well, no, it's a little dangerous to play the bishop out because that knight could actually eliminate that. And then this pawn would drop. Yes, this pawn would be lost. So she plays knight b4. Okay, that's her move, knight b4.
Well, so that really gives white a choice. I mean, he has his choice of trading for this knight or for that knight, if he wants to. There are probably other moves he could consider as well. There's a check that looks handy.
Right.
But Shmelov chooses to take the knight on f6 because it forces black to capture with his pawn.
You cannot take with the queen?
Because he's going to lose a pawn.
Because if he takes with the queen, this bishop, which is unprotected now, can actually just win this pawn on d6 because it's protected by the queen also. All right, so he cannot take with the queen, takes with the pawn. So black's move is G captures f6. All right. So now it's white's 17th move coming up.
Okay.
So what does Shmelov play here?
Shmelov takes his queen now, and he's going to continue with his threats. He's going to move the queen to a4, check.
Okay. Well, now this is actually not too good because to get out of check, we either actually have to block or to move that king. And we should be looking for the lesser of two evils. Now, if we block, there's only one way to block, is moving this bishop back here. That's the only way to block here. But if we block, what is the problem here? We can still...
Well, he could.
Yes, just
play
go
the
here.
Bishop to bishop 5. He could maybe pull the queen back here now.
Oh yes,
f7.
and now we have and that's even stronger. Okay. Look, we actually have an attack there. So yeah,
there's a number of things.
So the blocking is not going to help at all because it's going to relocate the queen with an attack on the f7 pawn. So what she does here is she plays king e7. Rather unpleasant, but it's necessary, to avoid the tactics of this position. All right, so now it's Shmelov's turn coming up. Her king is on king e7. But now this bishop is attacking this unprotected bishop on c4.
And so he decides that he's going to exchange these, and giving black the nasty choice of moving his king even farther out into danger.
All right, so she's not going to take back with the king because that actually brings the king into a more dangerous zone. So she recaptures. F takes e6. And now has a little wall. She's built up actually a nice little wall here, seemingly.
Right.
But that's deceptive.
Shmelov is going to build pressure. He's going to take his rook on a1 and move it to d1, creating a double attack on that pawn.
Oh wow! This is the threat: is to take here because actually. So this pawn needs to be protected again.
Right.
And what she does is plays king f7.
Right, because there was no piece he could bring up. He has to open up the bishop.
So now the bishop now helps in the protection of this pawn on d6.
And so then Shmelov attacks it one more time by playing e5.
Okay, so now we have a triple attack on this pawn here. Pawn, bishop, rook attacking this, which is only defended twice. So he realizes he cannot defend that pawn another way. So what he now brings his queen over to e8, says, okay, I'm willing to get off the line of fire here, but also offer the exchange of queens.
Right.
Okay.
Now, white, there's no benefit to exchanging queens. If white can win that pawn, but that's all he would get out of an exchange of queens, and maybe that would get black out of trouble. So white doesn't want to exchange queens.
No.
He wants to build up and maintain the pressure. So he plays queen to bishop 3, right on the diagonal facing the king.
So it's always good to hold on to your queen if your queen actually is superior as far as position.
If you're the one that has the pressure against your opponent, you don't want to exchange.
You don't want to release it.
You want to exchange if you're under pressure.
Right.
That relieves the pressure.
Yeah, this actually would be black would love to be able to exchange queens and relieve that tension.
Bring that rook over.
Okay, so he plays queen b3, and now we see the threat of taking here. So the queen b3. What she does is play d takes e5. So with that capture, this pawn on e5 now is attacking this bishop on f4.
And now he offers to sacrifice this bishop by taking bishop take e5.
Oh, well, actually, he's offering a sacrifice.
Offering a sacrifice.
Well, the question is, can this sacrifice be accepted? Well, what are the consequences if actually she were to take this bishop with f takes e5, how would we continue? Well, the problem is we would take...
The immediate threat would be knight, could take knight, check.
Check. And now the king has to move. Where can the king actually, move with impunity here? I mean, it can't go here or anywhere it goes.
Anywhere it goes. If it goes this way, the queen is going to slide over and check.
Exactly. Yes. If it goes on this, yes, it goes anywhere. So if it actually, it's right. And if it comes up like this, the same problem.
Same problem.
The queen comes over to f3, checks, and this is going to lead. This will lead to mate.
Right.
Right. So what this is telling us. Let's put this back here. Okay. So. That's right. So she cannot accept this. She cannot accept this bishop. Right. So what she does here, after the bishop takes it, she says, "Okay, I'm just going to move my bishop to g7. Bishop g7, which now we have an attack on the bishop. Okay, right. So
now he's going to just pull it back to safety here.
Okay, but back bishop c3.
Right.
Okay, so now we have the attack here, but the idea is still to keep the pressure over here on the e6 pawn. What she plays is rook b8.
Okay. Well, that exposes the queen to some danger now. If the knight moves, the queen is exposed.
All right. So what's he going to do?
He plays a fairly startling rook take e6.
All right. Okay. So, well, wait a minute. Is he offering this rook? Let's show our viewers what is wrong if black were to capture this rook with the queen.
He can't capture it with the king.
Well, he can't capture with the king. But he can capture with the queen. But there are dire consequences if she were to capture with the queen, because
the rook can come down to d7 check, driving the king away from the queen.
Because the queen cannot take because it's pinned. So what this would force the king to move, and then the white would win with the queen with mate to follow.
Right.
All right. So this is poison.
Right.
So this queen. So on this move here, when the rook took on e6, that means she cannot take that.
Right.
So what she did was try to counterattack. She realizes this pin here. This is very devastating. So she said, "Okay, I'm now going to attack your queen." She brings the knight back to c6. And actually attacks her rook on b8, attacks the queen on b3. But she overlooks something very important.
Right. A very powerful move that he had.
Okay, so what did the Shmelov do now?
He plays rook take pawn, and it's what we call a double check.
Ooh.
Because the king is in check from two different sources. One is the rook, which is protected by the bishop, and that we call it a discovered check. When he moved, it opened up the check from the queen to the king.
This is actually the most powerful check you can do, is double check.
The only thing you can do, if you have that resource, is to move the king.
It's a discovered check this way, but it's a double check. Okay. Well, in this position, the king only has one move, but she decided, she said, "No, I've had enough." The only move she had, but she was not willing to play this move because the game would end with checkmate.
Queen to e6.
Ends the game.
Right.
All right, so the final position was this devastating rook takes f6, double check, which ends the game. So this was a 25-move game, again played at the 2007 World Open, in which Denis Shmelov actually did very well at that tournament. And again, this is rather rare for him because actually he's a positional player. Usually his games are longer. He plays long, drawn-out games. And again, that's what he did at the Massachusetts Open. The 77th Massachusetts Open that was held Memorial Day weekend. He had long, grueling games. And you know what he did? Among his victims was the defending state champion, international master David Vigorito of Lowell, who, by the way, did you know that David Vigorito, who was the state champion last year, used to play actually in Leominster when we held tournaments, the Central England Open tournaments back in the 70s.
30 years ago, yeah.
In the early 80s, David Vigorito used to come to Leominster and play there. But Shmelov, this is an up-and-coming chess master. We're going to hear more from him. And I hope our viewers tune us in next time where we present a very interesting chess master that will present to us a game that we can analyze and delight our viewers. So join us next time for another edition of Chess Chat. We hope that you'll enjoy the game we present to you. Take care until then.